Welcome to Law Works, your local monthly law magazine show with news and information that you can use. I'm attorney Mike Weber.
And I'm attorney Daryl Crossway. On today's show,
the Law News Docket, where Daryl and I will be discussing elder financial abuse with our guest attorney Leanne Montgomery.
The guest docket will feature an interview with our guest attorney Leanne Montgomery, who will tell us about her background in elder law and answer some additional questions related to the current law.
On our resource docket, Daryl and I will provide some resources available in our area for elder care planning, and we'll review those with you at the end of the show. Welcome to the Law News Docket, the part of the show where we review law-related stories in the news and how they affect us. A recent study from Alliance Life Insurance shows that elder financial abuse remains an underreported and misunderstood issue, and one that will worsen as America's population ages and life expectancy rises.
The study of more than 2,000 Americans, both potential victims 65 and older, and other adults between the age of 40 and 64, found that misconceptions persist about the most likely sources of abuse and the financial impact that abuse has on its victims, which is very underreported, is often fairly significant.
While the number of the elders in the study who have said they've suffered financial abuse is relatively small at only 5%, this number likely is an underestimate because some seniors might not self-identify with this type of abuse or may not report this type of abuse. Given that the senior population is expected to surpass 54 million people by the year 2020, the Alliance Life Study suggests that millions of American seniors could experience this financial abuse. Nearly 1 in 5 adults aged 40 to 64 reported that they have an older friend or family member who's been a victim in the past. Of this percent, or of this amount of people, more than half said the victims did not report the financial abuse.
You know, the study also highlights a lack of awareness about the sources of elder financial abuse. When asked where the biggest threats actually come from, the majority of both elders and family friends of potential victims rated telemarketing contact as the most likely source of abuse, followed by internet scams and U.S. mail solicitation. Of those elders who reported experiencing financial abuse, the incident was more likely to have been perpetrated by a family member, a friend, or a caregiver than by a stranger. This is consistent with the previous studies suggesting that elder financial abuse is commonly committed by people familiar with the victim.
Joining us today is our very special guest, attorney Leanne Montgomery. Leanne, tell us a little bit about your background in elder law.
Well, Mike, I've been a practicing attorney for about 14 years, and in the last several years, I've focused my estate planning practice on elder law issues. So I work with elderly individuals and their families in planning not only preserving their assets, but how they're going to meet their long-term care needs.
Now, Leanne, being in the elder law area, have you seen this type of financial abuse in your practice?
Daryl, unfortunately, I have seen this kind of abuse. Often, sometimes the elder and sometimes family members will come to me and say that their parent has misplaced a significant amount of money and they just can't think what they've done with it. They're getting a lot of mail and they're for solicitations, and they're responding to that mail and writing a lot of checks to a lot of organizations that are questionable at best. They'll also certainly fall victim to scams where somebody comes to the door or, offering sidewalk repair or roof repair or driveway repair and wanting to be paid up front. But I think, as you talked about a little bit earlier, the Lion study also shows that a very large percentage of elder financial abuse, probably up to 90% of it, because a lot of it is unreported, is actually at the hands of family members or somebody close to the elderly individual. And this might occur for a lot of reasons. It could be that the individual is ill or maybe suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's and just is not aware of it. And sometimes The elder may be aware of it or suspect it, but that individual that is the abuser might actually also be their caregiver. And they're feeling the threat of being sent to the nursing home, which still has negative connotations in a lot of people's minds.
I think you potentially could see that when you have individuals that are close, from just taking advantage of the situation by taking advantage of maybe a power of attorney or a joint bank account, all the way up to just blatant theft, taking people's ATM cards and things like that. Is that something that you've had to deal with?
Something I very often have had to deal with. I think that most common scenario is what you mentioned, Mike, is that a trusting parent has named a child on a durable power of attorney document and said, I give you power to take care of things for me, but then that individual has actually used the money for their own benefit rather than their parent or whoever's entrusted them to their care.
One thing I was going to ask you about with the power of attorney, Leanne, is the fact that when that individual signs that power of attorney, I would assume that you have to make sure that the person that is signing that power of attorney is mentally capable of signing it?
Absolutely. And as elder law attorneys, we are certainly trained to make some assessment as to competency. Of course, we're not doctors, and there have been occasionally times in my practice where I've asked the individual to obtain a statement of competency from their physician so that I could be absolutely sure. The other thing that I'm very careful about in my practice is I do meet with families and their kids, but letting them know who the client is, who's in the driver's seat, who's making the decisions. It's mom, it's dad, or aunt or uncle. It's not them. And I would always, at some time during the consultation, have the kids go out of the room so that I can talk to that individual on their own, and you would be surprised. Usually it's all, everybody's in agreement, but occasionally the kid will leave the room and then I'll hear, well, really, that's not quite my feeling about it.
How do you set up something to help create at least some level of oversight in that situation where you're trying to keep an eye on people that are very close to the elderly?
Well, the first thing, to Daryl's question about a durable power of attorney, is I always say, no matter who you name here, you better trust them. They have certainly fiduciary responsibilities, and Ohio law addresses that, but often when that money's gone, it's too late. So I'll have situations where another sibling might come to me and say, I think my brother or sister or niece or whoever is abusing their power here. And that's a time I want to first of all meet with the elderly individual and see what they're thinking. But I would also often let them know, and I think it's important for our viewers to know, that Ohio law provides that every county provide adult protective services. And one of the big functions of adult protective services, which runs out of the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, is that they take reports of abuse, and not only do they take them, but they are required to investigate them. And when they are conducting their investigation, they as well will go and meet with the elderly individual. I think that's really helpful at times when a family member's a little uncomfortable with perhaps making an accusation, say, to another family member, that they can get an independent party involved.
Great. Well, thank you very much for commenting on that. I think it is an attorney talking to various people. You also have to be aware of scams by strangers, scams by professionals when you start to get into things like predatory lending, reverse mortgages, things that may not be a great idea. So it's always something the family wants to keep an eye on. But feel free to look for more information and bring up points that you do agree or do not agree on during the conversation on our Facebook page. So we thank you very much for for being here today. Welcome to the guest docket, where Daryl and I are going to interview our special guest, Leanne Montgomery. Leanne, tell us a little bit more about yourself for the viewers.
Well, Mike, I was born and raised in Cincinnati, and though I spent a few years away, I returned here to raise a family. I have 2 children who I raised on my own after being widowed when they were very young. I'm very proud of them both. I've got, my daughter is a teacher, and my son is now halfway through law school. In terms of hobbies, I think Cincinnati's the perfect place for me. It's so accessible. It's got so many cultural and recreational opportunities. I enjoy the parks and the bike trails for hiking and biking and walking. Certainly enjoy all the theater that's available as well.
Awesome.
Professionally, one of the most rewarding service opportunities I'm currently engaged in is serving on the Board of Trustees of Quaker Heights Care Community, which is in Waynesville, Ohio. My practice is more in Hamilton, Claremont, Butler, and a little bit in Warren County, but it's certainly been a nice compliment to have that opportunity to learn more about the challenges that a retirement community faces in meeting the needs of their residents and all the many regulations that are out there.
Now, you indicated earlier, Leanne, you've been practicing for 14 years. What led you to the practice of law?
Well, Daryl, my own experience of having very outstanding legal counsel when I was widowed kind of spurred me on towards a second career choice that I was already considering. So I entered law school in 1996 thinking that I might dovetail my prior professional experience as a nutritionist with the practice of law. And to a large extent, I've done that in estate planning and elder law. I continue to work in counseling clients and their families, just as I had counseled very often chronically and terminally ill patients and their families. And again, I think my own experience appreciating the need for good life planning and good estate planning has helped me develop an empathy for working in the area that I do.
You know, our focus today is, of course, on elder law for the show. Maybe you could differentiate elder law versus estate planning for our viewers.
Well, they're not completely separate, certainly. And what I have found is building from estate planning is that I am putting in that extra piece of thinking down the road. How are the client's wishes, a married couple's wishes, going to work with sometimes conflicting goals of preserving their assets, but yet also making sure their long-term care needs are met. And I find that couples and individuals have different goals. Some of them say, it's important to me that I leave something to my children, and we work towards that goal. Sometimes I've got kids in the room who say, we don't want it, it's for you, Mom and Dad, and please use that to the extent you need it. And I'm always amazed that every single individual, every couple, every family is different in what they're looking for.
So I would assume that you have to treat each and every family or individual that walks in differently because they have differing interests. Sometimes the kids, yeah, Mom and Dad, this is all you, and unfortunately, I bet you also see on the other hand where sometimes the kids are having a little undue influence on the parents.
Yeah, and you really need to be careful with that. And one thing that, just to backtrack a little, Daryl, your question, I think I always start in the same starting place of I need the same amount of information, the same types of information from you. But that conversation, sitting down, certainly with the client, whether that's an individual or a couple, and sometimes with their kids and sometimes not, really helps me determine what their specific interests are and concerns are.
As you're going down, the road, when does elder care planning become relevant?
Well, I think in my mind, it's relevant just about at any point to keep your eye on that ball. But I think I myself, as a baby boomer, aging along with the 76 million other baby boomers in this country, are all thinking about this. A lot of us right now are taking care of aging parents, or at least have concerns about aging parents. So the groups that I see that are really putting that into their plan are probably somewhere about 50 and up.
And as the senior gets older, when does again the idea of elder care planning start to become, I guess, an active issue? When they're switching to Medicare at 65, when they're older. I'm just trying to see a little bit more of when it starts to become a big issue.
Well, Mike, that's a really good question. In my mind, too often it becomes an issue way too late in the process. It may be that they've been assuming all along, oh, my kids will take care of me. It's often not until that time that a spouse falls and breaks a hip, has a stroke, and the well spouse can no longer care for them, that suddenly they're really scrambling and thinking, oh my goodness, now we need care in a skilled nursing facility. I had no idea how much it cost, and I wish we'd planned for this sooner.
I deal with a lot of Social Security claimants in my practice, and I deal with a lot of individuals who are on Medicare. Do you deal with Medicare or Medicaid in your practice, one more than another?
I deal with pretty much all forms of insurance. And so when I talked before about gathering all that information, I want to know what people are currently using and currently may be options that may be available for them. So I think it's an unfortunate situation that those names are so close, Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare is our federal health insurance program. It's available to people over 65 who are legally blind, as you know, Daryl, those who are disabled, people with end-stage renal failure. But for purposes of our discussion, we're talking about the majority of Americans who become eligible for Medicare when they're 65. It's really dependent on whether you participated in the Social Security system. It's not dependent on your income, it's not dependent on your assets, and it's not dependent even if you have a particular medical need. Medicaid is an entirely different program, and I guess I'll first start by saying that certainly all individuals with Medicaid who are over 65 continue to have Medicare. So a lot of times you'll hear people with Medicare, they have a supplemental health insurance policy that they've purchased through one of the major companies, or they've gotten it through their company when they retired. That is a way to think about Medicaid as being a supplemental policy to Medicare. I think the biggest surprise for most people, and back to Mike's question about when do they start planning, is somewhere in their mind they've got an understanding that Medicare or maybe their supplemental health insurance policy will provide for nursing home care. It will not. There are really only two ways to pay for skilled nursing or assisted living, and one is private pay, supplementing with your own income, and the other is through the Medicaid program.
Well, great. Thank you very much. We really appreciate having you on today.
Thank you, Mike and Daryl. It's been a pleasure being on the show today.
We appreciate Leanne being here today. And now for our resource docket. Mike and I will present some resources for elder care.
Today, Daryl and I are going to provide the resources for elder care support, starting with the Council on Aging and their website, which has many online resources as well as numbers and information for other assistance.
You know, before I arrived here today, I actually pulled up the Council on Aging website, and it is a phenomenal website. Council on Aging of Southwestern Ohio is a nonprofit organization dedicated to enhancing quality of life for older adults, people with disabilities, their families, and caregivers. The Council on Aging promotes choice, independence, dignity, and well-being through a range of services that help people remain in their homes for as long as possible.
The Council on Aging is a state-designated agency serving a 21-county region. One call to the Council links people to a wide variety of agencies, information, and programs that serve older adults and people with disabilities.
The website features pages such as programs and services. Under this heading includes advocacy, which features contacts to all lawmakers. For caregivers, includes free caregiver education and support program, which includes assessments and complete program for caregivers. This section of the website also includes information for such things as assisted living, care in your home, care transitions, long-term care planning, My Care Ohio information for consumers, nursing home pre-admission reviews, Ohio home care waivers, and Older Americans Act.
The Council also has an Aging and Disabilities Resource Directory. Here you're going to find information and resources available for seniors, people with disabilities, families, and caregivers in our region. To use the directory, click on the topics in the menu or on the left of your screen, or enter a search term in the search box. The address is www.helpforseniors.org. There are several files that you can download, and the topics included are care options and resources, where there is information, resources, and contact information for people who need care, whether at home, in the community, or in a nursing home. Most of the information in this section is aimed at helping you stay independent at home. They also have health and safety, whether it's finding a new physician or preparing for disaster. Resources in this section can help. There is also a section for housing, which can help with home repair, rental, utility assistance, or finding a home to suit your particular needs. There is finally a section on work, education, and leisure, which provides resources that will help you find the information you need for things such as taking a class, finding a park, finding a job, volunteering, or even just travel.
Lastly, the site offers a complete section for the providers that they work with to provide services. The section contains information on how they recruit and process providers before they're allowed to work with the Council on Aging. The section is for those who would like to provide services. Among some of the information provided includes application and request for proposals, conditions and specifications, information for prospective providers, which gives them an overview of providing services. Please check our Facebook page, and we'll have more additional information regarding the Council on Aging.
Thanks to our special guest, Leanne Montgomery, for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and be sure you tune in for our next show.
And please be sure to visit our Facebook page, Cincinnati Law Works, for more information on today's show. Like us and follow for more information about our upcoming broadcast.